welcome to ONYX Pages. I am in Jerry, and today I am going to be doing two things. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to review The Prey of Gods by Nicky Drayden, which is right here. I've spent a lot of time talking about this book. I absolutely enjoyed it, loved it, want more from Nicky Drayden. I'm going to do that, and then after that I'm going to cut to a video that was recorded today with Maija of Maija Reads. Maija is awesome. I will put a card to her channel in the description box, but you will also have an opportunity to meet her in the flesh, because in December of 2017, last year, the two of us read this book together and we exchanged notes over Goodreads, and then today we decided to film a video. So that is what's going to be happening, and stay tuned. I hope that you like this video. Okay, so The Prey of Gods. This is the genre of this particular story is actually quite contested. In the reviews that I've seen, it's been described as both a science fiction novel as well as a fantasy novel. I don't really pay attention to those divides between genres, because when I started reading, those divisions and categories and labels didn't mean that much to me. They don't capture my attention in the same way as they used to anyway, but in any event, I consider this to be a beautiful work of fiction. It is definitely science fiction. It definitely has elements of fantasy. It also has elements of magical realism as well. So in The Prey of Gods, we follow 7 main characters, and all of those individuals go through various transitions during the plot. So if you look on the cover, the person that you see on the cover, the young girl, is Namvula, and she is, I think, 7 or 8 years old, and throughout the story she gets to figure out that she is something a little bit more than human, more complex, more powerful, more magical. And beside her obviously is a robot, and it would be a spoiler to tell you who that robot is and why that robot might be standing beside her. But effectively what happens is the setting is 2064, 2065, so 50 years out into the future, Port Elizabeth, South Africa, and we've got an urban society that has been plagued by an overrun of rodents called dik-diks, which is actually an animal. I had no idea that it was actually a real animal, not a fictive character. And we also have a new drug that's been introduced to the population that has hallucinogenic effects. And then we also have a demigoddess who wants to be restored to her former glory. Unfortunately, that glory involves killing lots and lots of people and sucking their energy. So not a good thing. So all of these characters come together to deal with this demigoddess. But because each of the chapters is written from the perspective of one of the characters, it's very easy to get drawn into all of their stories. So it actually feels like, kind of feels like sort of a soap opera, where it has these little scenes and each scene tells you a backstory and it connects to another one. So I rated this, I believe, 4 stars on Goodreads. I really, really enjoyed this book, and now I'm going to go through the 7 cowrie shell rating system. Let me just open my notes. So the first element of the... Okay, so the first cowrie is about plot, and when I look at plot, the question is, you know, was the plot interesting? Was it engaging? Did it come to a climax? Was the climax resolved? Was I able to connect to the plot line or multiple plot lines as they went on? So in this case, I would give 1 cowrie shell for plot, because there were multiple plot lines. As I said, each of the characters had their own backstories, but all of those subplots wove really nicely together to get to the main issue, which was, what are we going to do about this demigoddess who is increasing in strength and who has a plan that will impact the people of Port Elizabeth in a really negative way? How are the people who become aware of her plan going to try and stop her. So that being the overarching question and problem that needs to get resolved, that was really clear, and I think that it was really well done. As the book progressed, we got a really great understanding of the motivations of all of the individuals who came together in different ways to try and bring down this demigoddess. So definitely one cowrie shell for plot. The second criteria is characters. And here I'm asking, are the characters believable? Are they consistent? Are they engaging? Are they unique and distinct enough from themselves? And I would give one cowrie shell for this as well. We've got a bunch of really interesting, diverse characters. We've got a young man who realizes that he's queer and in love with his best friend. We have the best friend who's also dealing with that as well. We've got robots who go through a transition in the midst of this story. We've got a young girl who has never really been parented properly and goes from guardian to guardian to guardian and has to deal with not only her growing sense of her power, but also the different ways that people manipulate her. We've got this demigoddess who also works at a nail salon, which is a little bit of a dissonance for her. And we've got this politician who's trying to reckon with different aspects of his personality and also his career aspirations. And attached to each of those characters are a host of sub-characters who help really fill out the stories of these people that we're following. Really, really engaging, really funny, really diverse. So definitely one cowrie for that. The third criteria of 7 is world building. And what I'm asking here is, what world is being created by this author and in this book? Is it believable? Is it consistent? Does it make sense? And the short story is that there's a full cowrie shell here for world building, because I think Nicky Drayden did a really good idea of building this near future Port Elizabeth, South Africa. Now I say that obviously as someone who's never been to South Africa and knows nothing about it, so maybe I'm not sure how legit that cowrie is, but we'll just stick with one for now. What I really like about the world building here is that you can tell that even though there were lots of different elements of this world put all in one place, they do actually work. So it is plausible that that every person living in this town would have a personal robot as an assistant. I mean, all you got to do is think about the ways in which you spend time on your cell phones and your smartphones and your devices, right? So in this world, the robots do things like help with navigation. They keep memories, quite like our smartphones keep video and so on. So these are sort of like these personal assistant robots that help with all different aspects of life. So that's plausible. It's plausible that 50 years into the future, that will be something that urban kids and folks will have. We also have in this world omniscient characters, like gods, demigods, who live among the people, who have regular everyday problems, like trying to pay the rent, trying to keep the heat on, trying to deal with drama and gossip from coworkers, but also trying to bring the world to an end. And so I really like the way that she has incorporated that kind of mythical pantheon of gods with this AI kind of more pure science fiction magic. I like how that works together, and she does it really well. I think the only issue that the third part of this world, which is sort of like the basic human part of it, puts together a number of different kinds of communities. So we've definitely got like a queer community. We've got a community of celebrities and their managers and their drug dealers and their fans. And then we've got this traditional South African village community that is dealing with a young person who has powers that they understand, but also powers that they loathe, and she gets punished for that. So we've got all these different aspects of the world working together. It's pretty much consistent except for one issue. The issue is that toward the last quarter of the book, we're introduced to another world, and that it happens really quickly, really abruptly. It doesn't quite jive with the rest of the worlds that were built, and it seems a little abrupt. So we sort of enter it and then leave it. And that was the only part of the world building that seemed a little hard to understand and move through, but it was very, very brief, and then we got back to the main conflict. So I would definitely still give a full cowrie shell for world building. The fourth is, was it Afrofuturist? And the answer is yes. This is definitely an Afrofuturism novel. Why? Well, there are robots and there are magical Black people doing things with with amazing technological skills. So that's one thing. But I think the idea that we are in an urban African setting that's very comfortable with technology, that's at the cutting edge of STEM, at the cutting edge of gene manipulation, and that this society is trying to figure out how the politics wrap around these advances in technology. I think that's a very pure Afrofuturism question. A lot of the mainstream science fiction that's offered to us has Europeans who are the ones who are shaping technology, and all the rest of us are just sort of either we're not in the picture at all, or we're there as the subjects, not necessarily the objects, the ones who are creating, right? We're the ones being done onto, as opposed to being able to decide how the world is going to run. And in this book, we actually have a politician who is in the center of this, who is working alongside Africans trying to figure out what to do. So I definitely do think that this is an Afrofuturist text, so definitely a cowrie for that. Queerness, LGBT content. So we have a transgender character, we have a transsexual character, we have a gay male character, we've got a bisexual demigoddess, and so we definitely see that there are a number of different kinds of relationships, a lot of different kinds of gender and sexual identities. I love to see that because that's what's in our world, and so it's normalized, but Nicky Drayden still does give us an opportunity to reflect on homophobia, heterosexism, transphobia in our families, and how our families react to us when we come out, what they do, what we fear they will do, and what can be done about that. And I think that's a really important theme. The sixth is, does this book challenge norms? I would give half a cowrie shell for this, because I do, while there are really interesting elements, science fiction elements and fantasy elements to this story, I don't know that norms, like societal norms, are actually challenged here. Most of the tropes that I see, so like the girl that finds out that she's magical, the pop star who realizes that she has a calling other than simply her music, like there isn't anything that I raised my eyebrows and thought, wow, that really pushed a stereotype to its limits. So I would say half a cowrie shell for that. Yes. And then the last was this an aspirational story? And here the question is, did it inspire hope in me? The story ends on a cliffhanger. And if there's a sequel to this story, which I really hope that there is, then the question that sequel will have to answer is a really, really important one. So I do think that the story is aspirational. However, the way that aspirational aspect of the story happened was that the characters were dealing with their own personal transgressions, their own shame, their own discovery, and they were trying to figure out how they were going to live their lives differently and better in a more authentic way. And I find that aspirational, because I do think that that kind of transition is something that we all have to deal with. However, I think that there was an opportunity for the characters to come together in some sort of higher goal other than just to stop this demigoddess. And I didn't really get the sense that there was something larger than that particular conflict that could have that was dealt with. if that sentence makes sense. So I would say half a cowrie shell for that. So as usual, I have no idea how many cowrie shells are at the total of this review, but I rated it 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. I will somewhere over here add up all the cowrie shells and put a really nice sign that tells you how many they added up to. I really enjoyed this book. Nicky Drayden, thank you very much for spending what was probably months, years of your life putting this together. It was an enjoyable story, and I hope that this video has inspired more of you to pick it up, to read it, and to enjoy it. And if you do, please do leave a comment in the comment box below. I'd really like to know what you think of it. Okay, so I'm going to pause this video here, and then we are going to come back with myself and Maija, and we'll be discussing The Prey of the Gods and our buddy read. Okay, thanks very much for watching. Bye. Hi everyone, I am Jerry from ONYX Pages, and with me is...
I'm Maija from Maija Reads.
And we're here today for a buddy read. So in the month of December, Maija and I read The Prey of Gods by Nicky Drayden. My copy is over here. And while we read the book, we exchanged comments over Goodreads, and now we're here to have a discussion about the book. So the way that the buddy read video that we're doing right now, the way that we're going to organize this is first, we're both going to provide you with a bit of a synopsis of the novel. We decided to do it that way because we're different people and we have different experiences, and we probably would summarize the novel a little bit differently. So we're going to start with giving you a synopsis of the story, and then we've each generated 3 questions, and so that will create a total of 6 questions that we'll be talking about and answering in this video. So we really hope that you enjoy it. So Maija, do you want to start with your synopsis of The Prey of Gods?
Okay, my synopsis of The Prey of Gods is that it is a fantasy and science fiction mashup that is set in future South Africa, and it follows a large cast of characters. So there are people like there's goddesses, there are humans who start to gain magical powers, and then there are AIs who start gaining sentience, and then there's also dictics.
And I wrote mine down because I had to. Okay, so what I said was The Prey of Gods is a work of Afrofuturism, and it is in both the science fiction and fantasy genres. And I also wrote down that it features a very diverse cast of characters, and they're diverse in terms of race, sexual orientation, gender identity, class, and also proximity to magical abilities. It's set 50 years in the future in a place called Port Elizabeth, South Africa, where instead of smartphones, people have robots by their sides called Alfies. And so we follow a cast of 7 characters, main characters, after which each chapter is named. And during the story, each of those characters goes through, or most of the characters go through a really significant transition. So in the year 2065, the novel spans 6 months. The Port Elizabeth Society has to deal with some changes in its environment, in its urban environment. So Maija mentioned dictics, which I don't even know what those are exactly. There's also a bit of a drug problem that they have to contend with, and then as the novel continues, there's increasing amounts of violence due to one of the characters. So there's well, we'll get into more of it later, but that's what I would call the synopsis.
That was it's like a refresher for me too, because I couldn't remember the year or anything.
Yeah, I watched a review of The Prey of Gods, and then somebody said it's set in the year 2064, and I'm like, how do you even know that? And then I realized that there are certain characters that are very specific about the actual date. And so it was cool to realize that the whole novel takes place in 6 months. And typically in books, you don't really get those markers in time and place in the same way.
Oh, they must have been in the AI chapters.
Yeah. Okay, so as I mentioned, Maija and I came up with 6 questions. So we're going to start with Maija's 6 questions first. I mean, 3 questions first.
Yeah, 3 each. I'm just trying to find a picture of a dick, but I'm failing.
I thought it was a made up animal. Oh, is it
It
like?
doesn't really show, but it's like it looks like a small deer.
Yeah. Okay. I actually thought it was a fictional animal. Are there dicks in Finland?
No,
Oh,
no.
are they related to kangaroos?
I don't think so. I think it looked more like something like I know you can't see it very well from the screen, but it looked like something like an antelope,
Okay, okay,
but small.
but small. Oh, okay. All right. That now makes a little bit more sense to me. Okay. All right. Okay, so your questions?
My first question was that did you have a character that you like to follow the most? Do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, so first of all, this is very hard because I loved all of the characters in the story. I think that they were funny and dynamic and weird and troubling, and I think it might be that each of the chapters was dedicated to their perspective. So I think that helped me as a reader to connect with their stories. But I have to say that I had sort of 2 favorite characters to follow. The first was Nomvula. So Nomvula is a little girl who is actually the girl on the cover here. And we find there she is. She's really
cute. The best cover.
I know. I love this cover. And what I love about her, and what I loved following about her, is that she had to deal with a lot. And, she had to deal with various kinds of abuse. She had to deal with the fact that she, kind of not parented. So she felt a little untethered through the novel, which left her vulnerable to people, various types of people with different motivations for trying to control her. And throughout the novel, we just see her getting in all of these different kinds of relationships. And we have to, I felt like I had to sort of support her as a character. I felt a lot of empathy, and I felt protective of her. But I also loved how resilient she was. It was unfortunate that as a child she had to be so resilient, but I loved it. I loved that she made discoveries. I love about different characters. I loved her intuitiveness. I love how she was able to read people's personalities, and even while they were being abusive to her. And I loved her strength and her rage and so many things about her. So I have to say that she was definitely the character that I got the most satisfaction from watching throughout. And I feel in terms of the plot, the character development, that she was the character who was tended to the most in terms of her development. And then my second favorite is Muzi. And I really liked following him because there is a romantic element to his plot line that I really thought was very cute. And also, I don't get to spend a lot of time in the mind of a teenage mixed race queer boy. Like I literally think, in reflecting on this book, I think this is the first time that I've spent time in a character like that. And so the novelty of that was really enjoyable for me.
Yeah, Muzi is one of my favorites as well. I didn't start like that he's my favorite. I think the book starts with him. The first chapter might be with him, and it starts with he has to get circumcised as a sort of to become a man, but he sort of grew on me as the plot developed, and he's so kind-hearted, which is the one reason that he became one of my favorite characters. He's actually my favorite from the human characters, shall we say, because there are different kinds of characters in this one. And I also liked how because you said that I forgot what the robots were called, but were they alphys? You said in the beginning, alphys, yeah, the personal robots. I really like that he treated his robot well, even though it was an AI, it's sort of an inanimate object to him, as you can probably see from other characters' reactions to the robots.
Yeah.
But he always treated his bot like it's like sort of a pet.
Yeah.
And other one of my favorite characters is actually his droid. So I'm it's sort of weird to be able to say that he and his droid are my favorite characters, but as I said in the beginning, it also has sort of this AIs gaining sentience theme.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I like those two.
Cool. I loved it when on Goodreads when you said that you were starting to really enjoy the bot character and that you like bots. I realized this is only the second story that I've read with a bot. The first one was a story written from not written from the perspective of, but involving an android, and that was in I believe it was either Octavia's, no, it was in Lightspeed, People of Color Destroy Science Fiction. And I just realized I don't read a lot of stories about artificial intelligence. And I like reading stories about artificial intelligence. And I realized that I think a friend of mine who is a director and also a science fiction buff and aficionado, he was talking to me about, it was a recent movie that came out, a remake of a movie, and I've since forgotten it, but it involves artificial intelligence in an uprising. And he said, every time you read a story about an android or a robot, think about slavery, and think about the slavery metaphor, and just use that as a lens, right? And so I thought about that with the alphys, and it's easy to forget that when somebody has a relationship with a machine, it's easy to forget that that person is exhibiting power and control and exercising power and control in a very similar, if not identical way to the ways in which people who believed that they owned other human beings treated those other human beings. And so, this took place in South Africa, right? Future South Africa, but South Africa, past of apartheid, and remnants of apartheid still being, commented on, I think, in the plot. So it was very interesting for me to see the relationships between Muzi and his alfie and other people and their alfies. And then also, I also thought about smartphones and because I was asking myself, for the world building, how realistic is this world? In 50 years, will we see alfies, right? And I do think we will. I do think that within 50 years, there will, maybe not as widespread as they are in the novel, but I think we already have people who have artificial intelligence supports, just like email was active, 100 years prior to to us getting access to it. So yeah, anyway, those are my thoughts.
The slavery aspect and the AI aspect especially fits well with this because it is set in South Africa, as you said. But one other thing that also I often think about when I watch movies with AI characters, something like Ex Machina, for example, there's often if there's a human-like robot, it's often a woman.
Yes.
So the theme is often sort of are women people too?
Yeah.
So that's another aspect, another way to look at it, but not, of course, in this book.
Well, just I loved Ex Machina as well, and I was actually thinking about voices in elevators. So mostly any kind of automated voice that I hear, whether it's an elevator or whether it's in an airport or Siri, right? Any any kind of automated voice tends to be a female voice, a middle-aged female voice, usually with an accent that is a particular like Western accent, or a British accent, or a particular kind of like British accent. And even computers, like if you look at, you know, Star Trek Enterprise, any of the Star Treks, any kind of, I think computers, those computers were female voices. But yeah, and then from my perspective too, I haven't seen a movie with a black female robot, right? And so, I think about even within that hierarchy, you know, which women are portrayed as worthy of being replicated, pleasing to look at, easy to control, and more pleasant to control, right? And more human, right? So yeah, so many things. I think I do want to read more stories that involve robots and androids and bots, because I think it'll push my analysis a little bit further, and it just develops so many questions.
Yeah, that could be like a video all in itself about AI and bots. So let's go to my second question, which was that about what did you think about the parental figures in this book, or the theme about parenting, how parental figures were depicted in the book?
I really thank you for asking that question, because I was really uncomfortable with them, and it was only until I thought about my answer that I realized that every single parental relationship was toxic, every single last one. Every single parent in this book is a complete abusive mess.
Yeah.
Everyone, right? And I'm like, oh, really? Yes, really. Even the fake parents are fucked, right? Sorry to swear. So, yeah, so I made a list, but, you know, it's just abuse. Muse's parents abusive. Elkin's parents abusive. Nambula's parent abusive. Her next sort of fake parents, 2 fake parents after that abusive. Ria's dad is abusive. Stoker's mom is abusive. Everybody's abusive.
Yeah.
And so given that that's that, the other thing that I found was Nicky Drayden gives us backstories for the abuse. So every parent that abuses their child has a reason for it, or at least a narrative that can help us understand how those abusive patterns might have developed. And in some cases, she's more forgiving than others. So in some cases, the story is understandable, and I found myself empathizing with the parent by imagining what they could have been like as a child, and sort of imagining forward how their abusiveness could have manifested as a result of the traumas that they had to deal with. So definitely your question got me thinking about intergenerational trauma, and intergenerational abuse, and the impact of that, right? Like, when does abuse end? So if my parent is a survivor of childhood trauma, what does that mean for me, right? Regardless of whether I am myself a survivor, and then what does that mean for my children and for their children? Like, how many generations does it take for that trauma to be healed and for that whole family to be well, right? And so sometimes I've read stories where I felt like the author was trying to force me to forgive the abusive parent. I didn't feel that in this case. I felt what Nicky Drayden did was, okay, yeah, dad and mom are messed, and here's one. And now you have more, and there's a bot. Like that's that's what I thought about it. What about you?
Yeah, it was the same. At one point, I just started thinking about it and going through all the parent figures, and like especially with Stoker, it was like it was like so messed up, and And one thing that I'm also again going to talk about the bots, because one thing again, because there is one bot in this book who hates humans, and if you sort of think about their owner as a parental figure, that's again the generational aspect, because the owner is abusing the bot because he is being abused.
Yeah.
So even with the bots, that's like evident.
Yeah. And what I love about that line is that particular bot, right? Like bots, because bots are unemotional and they're not restricted by the conventions of courtesy and politeness and empathy. They just say things that are so blunt, and it's what the humans are thinking, but we're caught up in, you know, trying to present in a particular way. So I found the robot characters very refreshing. And so in that way, the bot that you were talking about that had been abused, we see directly what that abuse amounted to and how that bot's worldview was created as a direct result, right, of that abuse. And I felt like that was a really helpful commentary that we got. And then the other, you know, so, and in some ways, I remember reading a review where they said, you know, there was something simplistic about the relationships, like the racial harmony was a little bit too utopian. And I don't agree with that. I think that the racial tensions are there. I think that for some they might appear subtle, but they were very obvious to me. But I also liked, as you described, the bot that was treated well. Like there's sort of this question of, you know, if you treat people badly, will they become like violent and horrible? And if you treat them well, will they not be violent? Will they be kind? Will they help others? Will they be more collaborative? I think those are simple questions. And I think that the answers are much more nuanced and complicated. And I don't always think that like, for example, violent uprisings, right? Like they're only violent in response to another violence. So I feel like sometimes we can affix value judgments on what people do or what entities do when they've been treated badly. Like even the big demigoddess, you know, who is horribly violent, you know, we're also offered this reason for why she is the way she is, right? Like it's not one of those stories where you've got a magical character that's just pure evil, right? Although I've heard her described as being just pure evil, but as a Black feminist, I don't let that be the last story anyway. And if I look deeper into her story, I kind of understand like her perspective, even though she's not a good person or thing. She was a really fascinating character to follow, like from the start. Like this demigoddess works in a nail salon, or was it a hairstylist? I can't remember anymore because it was one of the first chapters. Yeah, it was a nail. Like she did nails at a salon. So yeah, I think it's one of those places you can get your hair did, you can get your nails did, you can do all that stuff. And then she's a janitor by night. Yeah, but then she's like on her free time, she's a demigoddess who does all sorts of weird things. Yeah, you know, one of the things that I appreciated about how Nicky Drayden created that character, I loved how recognizable she was to me. Yeah. And how she walks with such anger, and how she walks with hurt, how she walks with a memory of her own greatness and the sadness of that being lost, notwithstanding the fact that her greatness meant harming thousands upon thousands of people, but just the fact that she just walks with this like grief and upset and yearning, and that's just how she lives her life. And the way that she grows in power and strength has a direct contrary relationship with others, and how they end up being diminished and dying, basically. So I thought that was really interesting. Any kind of magical character that gets their power from like drawing it from other people and diminishing and destroying other people, other entities. I like, so vampires, for example, like that metaphor, I get stronger as you get weaker. I live as you die. I always find those characters, like succubuses, I find those characters really interesting for the commentary that they provide to us, for sure. Her cat, the flippant way that she engages in violence, like her disdain for human life, I found very arresting and sometimes difficult to read, but also hilarious. Like I like also hilarious, which scared me about myself. But I was just like, oh my God, she just said that, and I just started to giggle. I'm like, she doesn't care about human life.
It's just somehow fascinating, so you get like caught up in it. But also Nicky Drayden has this great way of writing. She makes people make these flippant comments at times, even though if it's a serious thing that's going on.
Yeah.
So, my final question, I have to admit that I haven't thought about this a lot myself, but how did you feel about the mix of science fiction and fantasy elements? That this was sort of a mix of everything.
Yeah, so, I have to say, like, I didn't know what science fiction was until I was a teenager, and like a boyfriend of mine was like, do you like science fiction? And I was like, I don't even know what science fiction is. And then I was introduced to Necromancer and Ursula Le Guin and like all of that stuff. And then I realized, I like that stuff, but I never really called it science fiction. And then as I learned more about the ways that fiction is divided into genres and subgenres, I started to understand what science fiction was. And then I sort of started to understand what fantasy was. But I don't see the separations as starkly as others might. So I think that this is like science fiction because it involves elements of like actual science. So like the robotics and technology of the AI, and there's like coding, and there's STEM, right? Like there's actual like STEM in the story, and we get exposed to that. And it also, like, the story is partially written in code, which surprised me and which I really like. And then this, I guess the element of fantasy has to do with like the pantheon of gods that we're introduced to, or I think where perhaps both intersect might be the genetic mutation of animals, which is a science fiction element, but that the animals themselves are connected to the gods. So there's a fantastical element to them as well. But all of that seemed so seamless for me. And it was only until I started reading these reviews where people are clutching their pearls at like how the two like genres are, there's like you described it as a mashup. Others have described it as a tension between these elements. And I'm just like, I'm not mad at it. I think it's great. I don't know why it would be anything else. Like, why wouldn't we have bots and demigods in the same world? Like, why not? You know what I mean? We've got Trump. I mean, that's more of a problem for me, right? Like, so, yeah. So I just kind of, I was fine with it.
Yeah.
I've also read a recent article about queer Afrofuturism, and it described Afrofuturism as like a category and not necessarily a genre, and that a lot of female Black science fiction writers or female Black writers in the Afrofuturism genre, they're just known for the enmeshment of what traditional pure sci-fi would consider just sci-fi. So like Octavia Butler, Nella Hopkinson, and N.K. Jemisin, and Nnedi Okorafor, and like Tananarive Due, like Nishi Shaw, like all of their works, sort of blend different genres. Maybe Octavia Butler more than some of the others, but I was fine with that. I think I was raised on that kind of like connection. What's odd is that separation for me. What about you?
Yeah, I'm not one for like strict genre boundaries as well. So I really enjoyed it too, that there were like the magic aspect and goddesses and sort of the mythological aspect. And then there was that this is set in the future where they have high tech.
Yeah.
I really like that sort of thing. Maybe it is better to just describe it as Afrofuturism, because if it is known for this sort of putting all different sorts of elements in it, as rather than a science fiction fantasy mashup, maybe Afrofuturism is the better term for it.
Yeah, or both.
Yeah.
Or yeah, because I used to think that Afrofuturism was a genre in and of itself, and then I read an article by Nella Hopkinson, which was posted by Nadia Okorafor, and they're like, it's not a genre, like it's a category. It might be a framework, it might be a paradigm, but it's not a genre, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh crap! I just got the concept of Afrofuturism as a genre. Now I'm being told that it's not. So,
yeah, but I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah. Should I move on to mine?
Yeah, let's move on to your questions.
Okay. All right. So my first question is a favorite question. What was your favorite relationship in the novel? And
I think I already sort of told this in the first question. I really like Musi and will I call them Clever for One? Yeah. So Musi and their bot. Musi and his bot. I was just, I don't know, even if they didn't spend that much time together.
Yeah.
Perhaps more in the start than later on. I just really enjoyed this, maybe because it is not, because they are so different from each other.
Yeah.
So that might be the reason. And I also, like, I was thinking about the relationship, because there were a lot of these characters meet up only at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And the ones that meet up earlier don't have the best relationships.
Yeah.
So that's why maybe I got really into the Musi and Clever for One relationship, because they were there from the start. Mm-hmm. And they were both main characters, or characters that we follow rather than being side characters. And also, well, the other big relationship that is in the book is Musi and Elkin, which was also really interesting to follow, because I just didn't know where it was going to go because of Musi's powers and just because of the plot. I had no idea. But I was all for the bot and human relationship, and it became like really important to the book later on.
For sure. Very important. So I loved a lot of the relationships. So I guess I have two. Actually, no. My favorite relationship was the relationship between Stoker and his mother. So that's my favorite relationship. And the reason why it's my favorite relationship is because I've been thinking a lot about my mother lately, and thinking a lot about mothers in general and relationships with mothers. And I can really identify with like the trope of like the mother who wants to protect the child at all costs, even at the cost of the child themselves. And I like that trope. I can appreciate it, right? That kind of like imperfect love. My laptop is on. Okay, hope. I have to turn this off. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, it's done. Okay. So I think like that's the thing that I liked about the relationship for sure. And I also like that we find there's a reveal later about Stoker's mother that really, and the metaphor that's used, the dimensions of her character are just make a lot of sense to me. So I really liked that, how their relationship developed. I wish that we had more and we were given more given more details, given more illustration of that relationship. The two secondary relationships, so Musi and Elkin, because it was cute, and Rife and Rhea. So those are the romances that we were offered, and I appreciated those. Question was about, how does, and I'll give you context for it. Like, I feel that as an Afrofuturist, I don't read only for pleasure. I read for edification. I read so that I can understand our world a little bit better. And I like to ask, what contribution does this story make to contemporary issues that our societies are dealing with? One contribution that it makes is that it shows us how families can survive after a member of the family coming out as genderqueer or as queer. So it gives us an example of like what forgiveness can look like. I think that it also gives us an example of how like a person can seek wellness through coming out as queer or genderqueer. It also provides commentary on what we already know around, I forget the term, but basically playing with the genetic code of like animals and humans, the problems there. Mm-hmm. And I also think that the contribution that it makes is, unlike other stories that just talk about like AI uprisings and robots getting mad and trying to destroy everything, it adds a new element to that trope, right? Like, are there ways that we can be more mindful about how we create and use technology so that we're not reinforcing inappropriate or like dominating ways of engaging with other beings, right? So I think there's that. And then the other contribution that it makes is about like leadership, right? So we've got an entertainer who's a leader, we've got a politician who's a leader, we have other kinds of leaders, and what can those leaders do? Like, are there roles? Can celebrities play a role in changing things for the better? And what does that look like? And do they take those roles seriously? And then the last is we become really vulnerable as a society when there's an environmental crisis. And so are we prepared, right? Like, would we be prepared for an urban crisis of that scale? And what have we set up as a society that would help in that situation, and that would hinder that situation? So I think those were the things that I thought about. So the context of South Africa was very prominent in the beginning of the book, but towards the end, this story could have been anywhere. And so it lost its Africanness and its blackness as the plot moved towards the climax. And I would have liked to see that remain a little bit so that it could provide different kinds of questions there, but I'm not mad at that. But I did notice that there was a lot more sort of, mythology and stuff earlier, and then towards the end, it became more of a pure urban, could have happened anywhere, kind of post-racial, unfortunately, toward the end.
Yeah, the ending was it was mostly like action based, the like final third of the book. So it was just like, we are in a city, these characters are in a city, but there wasn't any like specific features or specific settings, like atmosphere.
Right. So that's it. Those are our 6 questions discussing the Prey of Gods. Do you have any final last words about the book?
I thought it was really fun, and it was like, so even though we've been talking about the end, that the ending felt rushed, I still really enjoyed reading it, and especially at the beginning, because there are so many characters and the chapters are so short. I would just keep on reading. I would be like, yeah, I'm going to read one more chapter. I'm going to read one more chapter. Maybe at the end that became a bit of a weakness because I wanted to know more. But at the beginning, I was just reading it quite fast.
Yeah. I was left going like toward the end. which I think might be what Nicky wanted us to feel. I thought it was amazing. I really enjoyed it. I'm happy that I read it. I want to read more of her work. And speaking of more of her work.
Yeah, so The Prey of Gods was Nicky Drayden's debut novel. She's written short stories before, I believe. And she has a second novel. Her second novel is coming out in August 2018, and it's called Temper. And what I know about it, it's more of a darker, more maybe mythical in feel. As I've seen the cover, there's a cover reveal, and it's a pretty gorgeous cover.
Yeah.
Again.
Cool. So we are done for our buddy read of The Prey of Gods, and thank you for those of you who watched all the way to the end. So for those of you who are subscribers to ONYX pages, I would encourage you to visit Maija Reads if you haven't visited her page before. She's been a booktuber for far longer than I have, and has some really amazing science fiction and fantasy reviews on her channel, and I think you'll really enjoy it, because I definitely do. So please visit her channel and subscribe and look around if you haven't yet. If you've read The Prey of Gods and you have thoughts about it, share those thoughts in the comments below. That would be really great for us to be able to continue this discussion. And if there are any books that touch on themes that we've talked about that you think either of us would like to read, we would also appreciate any recommendations that you might have. So on behalf of myself, thank you very much for watching this buddy read, and I will pass it over to Maija to close.
So thanks so much for asking me to buddy read with you in the first place. And I'm Maija from Maija Reads. I'm a Finnish booktuber who mostly reads fantasy, but also science fiction. And I also read a lot of comics and other sorts of speculative fiction. And I'd also love to hear your thoughts. So leave them in the comments if you also read this book. And that's all from me. And thank you so much for watching.
Thanks. Bye.